Welcome to the Unlist. Today we're talking about Paco Rabanne. Yippee! So Paco Rabanne is a little bit related to my previous video on Balenciaga because they're both Spanish houses, and Paco Rabanne's mother was actually a seamstress for Cristobal Balenciaga, and that connection in the industry there, her being a seamstress for Cristobal Balenciaga, landed Paco Rabanne opportunities to work with other designer houses. So Paco Rabanne began sketching dress designs and fashions for people like Hubert de Givenchy, Christian, Dior, and then eventually he worked for, himself, right? He eventually got in on himself. But the thing about Paco Rabanne is his name is not actually Paco Rabanne, okay? His name is actually Francisco Rabanne Cuervo. I don't know if he's actually related to the Jose Cuervo family, the family that takes care of the alcohol. Don't know if there's any ties there or not, but that's his name, Francisco Rabanne Cuervo. So you can tell that he took his middle name, Rabanne, and made it Rabanne, and then Paco came from somewhere. So Paco Rabanne is like Elton John. It's his stage name that he used most of his life. So the thing about Paco Rabanne is in stark contrast to Balenciaga, which shuttered in the 60s and then became a zombie house for the better part of the next 50 years. Now it's kind of back on track. Despite all the controversy, it's back on track. But it kind of shuffled without direction for half a century, thanks to bad business decisions and owners. But Paco Rabanne, which is also a much younger designer, he was an enfant terrible, much like Yves Saint Laurent. So he was not respected by the elder designers in the community. They looked at him as a disruptive influence. He was very subversive. And the reason why he was subversive, it's off topic for fragrances, but the reason why Paco Rabanne was an enfant terrible, the reason why he was considered so subversive, so disruption, is he would take materials that were not typically used in making clothes. He would use plastic, he would use metal, sequins, okay? So that's just weird and futuristic in a Barbarella, Buck Rogers kind of sense, and that was just something he didn't really do, but he didn't care. He did it anyway. So that was his big claim to fame in the fashion industry, was him using unorthodox materials and making futuristic shapes. Now the fragrances launched in 1968 because his industry connections made him able to hook up with Antonio Puig, which is, a designer that ended up becoming more of a cosmetics brand in time. So Antonio Puig liked to use a perfumer named Rosendo Matteau for a lot of their creations. So they kind of put Rosendo on loan to Paco Rabanne. So Rosendo either created or co-created most of the fragrances that were released for Paco Rabanne through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Eventually, Rosendo Matteau got old, he retired, went and did his own line for a while, his own niche brand, and then he passed away, unfortunately, so rest in peace. But he was kind of there, either the driver's seat or the passenger seat for most Paco Rabanne fragrances, male or female, okay, so both. Now, the most famous fragrance from Paco Rabanne for the longest time was actually a woman's fragrance. You thought I was going to say Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, didn't you? You thought I was. But actually, no. Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, even though us collectors, us enthusiasts like it so much, and a lot of the older guys who were wet shavers liked it, and I'll tell you why. Let's put a pin in that for right now. But the most popular fragrance from the house for the longest time was actually Calandre, the first fragrance from 1969. And it's a typical fruity, citrus, chypre kind of deal. So if you like Fiji by Guy Laroche, if you like Y by Yves Saint Laurent, if you're into that whole thing, you like Cristal by Chanel, you'll probably like Calandre. It's in that wheelhouse. So Silences by Giacomo, same thing. It's in that wheelhouse. So that's for you if you're into those kind of fragrances marketed to women. And I know a lot of you guys are. I know I am. I know I like it. The first men's fragrance, though, was the aforementioned Paco Rabanne Pour Homme. And the reason why it became such a big wet shaver affinity, why so many wet shavers love Paco Rabanne, why Paco Rabanne became ubiquitous for a number of years, is not actually super obvious to people. So everyone that says Paco Rabanne smells like Irish Spring soap, and you say, no, it doesn't, no, it doesn't, it doesn't, and you say, no, it doesn't. Actually, yeah, it does. It does. But it doesn't smell like the current Irish Spring soap because they've changed the smell. And they did that, by the way, this is off topic too, but they changed the smell of Irish Spring in the 80s. Okay? So what Paco Rabanne actually smells like is the old bottle, the old bars of Irish Spring soap. Very specifically, Paco Rabanne Pour Homme smells like the original German bars of Irish Spring when it was called Irische Frühling. And Irische Frühling was released as a German market soap by Colgate-Palmolive based on the popularity of a competing, see, this is a big mouthful here. Irish Spring or Irische Frühling was created in response to the popularity of a competing brand's aftershave. And that aftershave is Sir Irish Moss. So if you're familiar with Sir Irish Moss, released in I think 68, okay? And Irish Spring soap or Irische Frühling for the German market was released in 70. It didn't hit America till 74. So technically, if we're doing a chicken and the egg argument here, Paco Rabanne Pour Homme actually landed in the U.S. a year before Irish Spring soap did. So it does smell like the soap, but it smells like the original German soap. And the reason why I think Paco Rabanne did that, or why I should say Rosenda Mateau did that, was easy. Very popular, ubiquitous smell. It's a fougere. It's a fougere smell. But it has a very strange and unusual top note that involves a material that we now take for granted. A lot of perfumers now take it for granted, but it has a very strange and unusual for its time top note that involves two chemicals that were at the time very new. And these were actually kind of handed down from their down market descendants because they were also in the Sir Irish Moss. They were also in the bar soap. And those two materials are dimetol, which is a brand, a trade name for a material, and then dihydramyrcenol. Both of those are used to extend the life of citrus notes and create a fresh, soapy, metallic lift that brightens up a composition. So having those materials in a fougere was a first for Paco Rabanne Pour Homme. And because it was basically taking a down market smell and bringing it up market, that kind of connected people in a way that was not foreseen. Because you had rich guys and us poor guys alike who all enjoyed the smell of Paco Rabanne. So it kind of brought people together in a weird sort of way. Now the thing about Paco Rabanne Pour Homme is, you may not realize it now, but the bottle design for that back in the day, especially the original bottles, was kind of loud, So the whole thing about Paco Rabanne making big, goofy bottles is not new. It's just that what we think is goofy looking now, things were more conservative back then. So having a bottle with a gigantic metallic R slapped in the front of it, was weird and goofy. Nowadays, we look at vintage bottles of Paco Rabanne, and they're just like slope-shouldered, and they have them R on them, and we don't think anything. I'm like, oh, what's the big deal? That looks normal to us now. Now it takes a robot or a freaking bar of gold, to really make us go, that's weird. Something really, really outlandish. That's just Paco Rabanne trying to kind of up its own game. It knows that its heritage of being strange and weird kind of has to be maintained. And, Francisco Rabanne de Cuervo himself was also a weird cat. He would talk about all the past lives he supposedly had. He talked about being a reincarnation of a French prostitute who was in the court of the Sun King. So yeah, put that in your pipe and smoke it, okay? The dude thought he was a reincarnation of like an 18th century or 17th century prostitute, okay? Weird stuff there, all right? And it just gets weirder because he had dreams of like Paris being on fire and stuff. He had collections of drawings that he didn't share with anybody for 30 years. And he was also friends with Salvador Dali. Need I say any more? If you're friends with Salvador Dali, you're a little weird, okay? So, Mr. Melting Clock guy, you're a little strange. It's okay though. We don't mind strange, I'm strange, so it's all good. Now, Paco Rabanne would continue rolling out feminine and masculine fragrances, kind of like leapfrogging each other. We'd see Eau de Metal, and then we would see Sport de Paco, a flanker to Paco Rabanne. Then we'd have La Nuit, and then eventually we would have the first new men's fragrance in 1988 called Tignere. And Tignere was a big flop. Fantastic fragrance. I love Tignere. It's great, but it was a little too artsy-fartsy. You know, it was rose and sandalwood and petitgrain and all of these strange things that today would be like niche nose candy. You know, the kind of guys who spend $400 on bottles of Xerjoff would love Tignere. Actually, it's in that wheelhouse. But putting that in a bottle and selling it to the mainstream in 1988, when everybody was like jumping on New West and Cool Water and stuff, and Eternity was only 1 year away, yeah, bro. Yeah, that's not working. And it didn't work. It was like the shortest lived Paco Rabanne men's fragrance imaginable. It was on the market for like 2 years. And then languished in discounters for like 20 years. Now it's expensive because supply is finally dried up. But for the longest time, you couldn't give that stuff away. It's a shame too. It's a really, really beautiful fragrance, you know, worth investigating. So then Paco Rabanne kind of like, you know, went back to basics, went back to their fougere roots, and they made XS Pour Homme. This is also a very historically noteworthy fragrance because XS was the first man's fragrance that had a woman's line after. Usually it goes the other way around. The woman's fragrance comes out first. Eternity comes out before Eternity for men. Obsession comes out before Obsession for men. So on and so forth. You know, that's how it goes. But with XS, the man's version came out first. Okay, in 93. Polo Sport technically did that too, but Sport hit the market after XS did. So if you're pedantic, by a hair. So it was the first fragrance to kind of be men first, and then women followed. And then Paco Rabanne has kind of done that ever since. So I mean, 1 Million came out before Lady Million, for example. So and Invictus never got a woman's version. Invictus has like Olympia, I think, is like the woman's version of that. So in some cases there's not an exact female equivalent. There's a different line. And Tignere also never had a female equivalent. It was just a singular man's fragrance, like Antaeus. It stood by itself. So XS is very interesting though. XS was a back to basics fragrance, so they were looking at the original Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, and they were taking that concept and pushing it into the future. So we're talking more bright, shiny, you know, linalool accords and dihydromercenol accords and ozonic zippiness, very, very punchy juniper in that fragrance, okay? Gerard Anthony was actually working on that alongside Rosendo Mateo. And Gerard Anthony, if you know anything about him, he made the original Azzaro Pour Homme back in '78. So he knows his way around a fresh, soapy, barbershoppy style fragrance. He knows his way around those very well. So he also has done big, huge, musky stuff too, like Balenciaga Pour Homme and Azzaro Actor, but he's no stranger to clean stuff, actually. So XS Pour Homme has a inversion, actually, of the fougere accord, but this is why it's significant. Most fougere accord fragrances, it's lavender first, geranium second. It's not geranium and lavender, it's lavender and geranium, correct? Okay, going all the way back to like Fougere Royale. It's lavender and geranium. The lavender always hits you first. With XS Pour Homme, the geranium hits you first. You get the mintiness, the crispiness, that metallic facet, that little tiny bit of green sort of rosiness that geranium has. You know, the fake rose, effectively, brings that in. And it brings that in with the juniper and the mint. And then, in the background, is the lavender, which is probably not real lavender, it's probably linalool, but in the background, here's the linalool kind of just sitting behind the geranium. And it's an inversion of the fougere accord. It's very interesting. Then the rest of it is taken away with white musks and cedarwood and stuff like that. Of course, a lot of people know XS Pour Homme as the fragrance Creed kind of sort of duped when they made Himalaya like a decade later, 2002. Creed Himalaya comes out to the point where a lot of the frag bros, a lot of the idiots think that XS is a copy of Himalaya. And I can't entirely blame them because they changed the bottle of XS in recent years and they changed the juice color of XS. So now XS has gray colored juice, which Himalaya is a gray bottle, right? It's a solid, opaque gray bottle. So if you take your juice and you make it gray to look like something else, then people are going to think the copier is the thing being copied. I guess Paco Rabanne did that because they saw who was winning and who was losing, so they decided to just kind of fall in line there. But it's kind of sad since it's not. Paco Rabanne didn't rip on Creed. Creed ripped on Paco Rabanne. XS Pour Homme was released in 1993. Okay, so 9 years before Creed Himalaya came out. And the original bottles have a straw-colored juice in them, a slightly yellowish clear juice. And they're tall and thin and have like a lighter cap that flips back like this, like a Zippo lighter. So the ones you see now where the cap comes off, that's not how it used to look. And the gray color is not how it used to look. That's what it looks like now, okay? After that, Paco had a bit of a identity crisis. Paco Rabanne would make the unisex fragrance called Paco, trying to, ride the CK1 craze. Came out in 95. We would see Paco Rabanne come out with a strange gourmand fragrance called Ultraviolet, which comes in a black light bottle. So it's so weird because you see the ultraviolet bottle and you're like, it looks like something you would use on an episode of like CSI to like scan for like blood stains or whatever to make sure the killer hasn't been in the room or something. And Jacques Cavalier was actually involved with that, Cavalier Bellitrot, with Rosen de Matteau also, because like I said, he kind of plays, jumper seat with whoever he's working with if he's not doing it himself. So the thing about Ultraviolet is it wasn't an immediate success. Ultraviolet was low-key kind of a failure. So the bounce back from Ultraviolet was a new fresh version of Paco Rabanne Pour Homme because XS had done so well. So let's give the original OG a fresh version. So we get Paco Rabanne Pour Homme O, EAU. Paco Rabanne Pour Homme O came out in 2004 or 2003, I believe. And Paco Rabanne Pour Homme O is basically like, it's like they XS-ified, if that's a word, not a word, but they like XS-ified the original Paco Rabanne Pour Homme. So they made it more transparent, fresher, brighter cedar wood accord. So it has a matching cedar wood accord to XS. So if you always wondered what XS and the original Paco Rabanne Pour Homme would smell like together in a blender, then you want the O flanker, Paco Rabanne Pour Homme O. And O also, it ostensibly replaces the Sport de Paco because Sport de Paco was another fresher take on Paco Rabanne Pour Homme, but it didn't escape the 80s. So this is a replacement for that, I suppose. Now, where the brand is today is really the result of the brand's increased presence in the nightclub scene. So what happened was Ultraviolet started to eventually become something of a club fragrance because it's sweet, it's heavy. When you put it on a sweaty body, it carries really loud, it punches through the air. That's what clubbers are all designed to do, like La Malle, like Lapidus, okay, like all those, like Nikos and Jope. All of those punch through the air because they're heavy and they're sweet. So Ultraviolet was good at that. And then suddenly they're like, well, hey, we have ourselves something here. Let's do this. So then in 2008, we saw 1 Million come out. And it too had a pretty goofy bottle. It had a bar of gold was the shape of the bottle. And 1 Million is noteworthy for being the last fragrance that Francisco Rabanetta Cuervo himself sat in on. So the last fragrance that was creatively directed by the designer himself was 1 Million. So Invictus, he had no part to play in that. So 1 Million gets a lot of hate, and I understand why. It is very loud, it is very sweet, it can be very annoying when over-applied, but at its core, it's a tobacco fragrance. Once you strip all the sugar away and all the blood orange and all the other rooty-tooty, fresh and fruity notes, you strip them all away, what you're left with is kind of a strange, like suntan lotion mixed with tobacco. It's like someone took copper tone and rubbed some copper tone into your smoking pipe. And boom, that's 1 Million in a nutshell. So if you spray that at a very low volume, you know, like 1 or 2 sprays, back of your neck, don't put it on your chest, don't put it on your arm, just put 1 or 2 shots back here. On a really cold day, like we're talking at least 30 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, it actually works very well. You don't have to use it for the nightclub at all. You can just literally use it as a cold weather fragrance with very judicious application. So some of you guys that are kind of like on the fence about it, the ones who hate it, you hate it, that's fine, you can keep hating it. But if you're on the fence about it, try wearing 1 million in the cold. Low dosage in the cold. I guarantee you, you will have more appreciation for it. So, and it's got 1 million flankers too, because of course it does. That brings us to the post-Rabanne stuff, because Paco Rabanne died recently, but he wasn't involved in the house for quite a while. He kind of did what most folks do when they get old and when they have a lot of money and they retire, okay? So they stepped away. Invictus, that's okay. I mean, Invictus does have a strange black olive accord in it. People don't actually realize it's there. But if you look at the production notes and the brief for that fragrance and you talk to the perfumers and you start digging up the history on Invictus, you'll realize there's actually a black olive accord snuck in there, in between all the fruitiness, all the bay laurel, all the, you know, ethyl maltol stuff. There's actually a strange, salty ambergris powered black olive accord in there. Once you smell it, you can't unsmell it. You can't unsmell it, okay? Now, the Aqua Flanker and all the other ones, they don't have it. I mean strictly the 2013 original bottles of Invictus. Or their reformulated versions. It doesn't have to be an actual day one bottle, but I mean the original fragrance itself. Okay, it has to be that, just the standard Invictus. You'll notice there is a little tiny bit of black olive in there. And you would have never looked for it if I hadn't told you. It's like, where's Waldo? It's kind of in there on the page. You got to dig for it. And now we've got Phantom. Phantom, I mean, okay. Phantom tracks in regards to what Paco Rabanne is all about, which is being weird and futuristic and space age. So if you didn't know the history, if you didn't watch the video I just made, you wouldn't know that Phantom actually fits in with Paco Rabanne's theme of weird, futuristic materials, yada, yada, yada. So it actually tracks with the brand. Now, it's also made by AI, so people don't like it for that reason. And I'm not particularly a fan of it either for that reason, because I don't like the future where all of our movies and music and written stuff and, you know, and visual art is all just regurgitated by Chat GPT or Stable Diffusion or something like that. I don't want a world made by Skynet, okay? I want a world that has human-made beauty in it. I don't want what a computer algorithm thinks beauty should be. I don't want that in my life. I'm not really into that. So I kind of give Phantom some digs for that reason. But outside of that, it's a pretty cool concept. I mean, it smells like hot crap on a plate, but the concept of it's not bad. I mean, it's just weird. It smells like metallic lavender ice cream. That's what Phantom is. Phantom is like metallic lavender ice cream. It doesn't make sense. But to a computer, it makes perfect sense because that's a computer made it. So, and 3 human perfumers had to shape that too. They took that monster and shaped it into something that a person could tolerate on their skin, I guess, right? So there you have it, guys. That's the House of Paco Rabanne. Hope you enjoyed my little trip down the Paco Rabanne rabbit hole. And if this inspires you to go smelling some fragrances, then please do. And as always, thanks for watching the Unlist. And if you didn't watch the whole video, I'll know.